Well, hello and welcome again to the Pastor Study. As we journey through Nehemiah's prayer, we've seen that he began it with adoration. We see that he followed that up with confession. And then he continues on in that prayer with reminding God of what God said to them. He tells them in verse 8, he says, "Remember the words that you commanded your servants." He says, "If you are unfaithful, I will scatter you." Hey, guess what? That's what you've done, God. You've kept that part of your promise. You said if the people of Israel would be unfaithful, you would scatter them. And that's what you have done. But then he goes on and he says, "But if you return to me and keep the commandments and do them, though those of you who have been scattered were in the remote part of heaven, I will gather them and bring them back to this place." He says, the second part of the promise, God, was if we repent, you'll bring us back. No matter where we are, no matter how far you scattered us, you will bring us back home. And so Nehemiah, in his words of thankfulness and praise, is reminding God of the promises that he made, of that promise specific to Israel that they would be scattered, and if they confessed, if they repent, if they return to being obedient, he would bring them back. And then he says, that he continues, he says that your servant and your people who you redeemed, by your great power and by your strong hand, he says, this is not going to happen unless you are involved, God. We are never going to be successful in return to you, God, unless you bring us back, unless you intervene, unless you do a mighty work. And so then, as Nehemiah prays, he wraps up this prayer with, "O Lord, I beseech you, may your ear be attentive to the prayer of your servant and the prayer of your servant who delights to revere your name, and make your servant successful today, and grant him compassion before this man." Now, he knew that he was a servant. He was a captive, and he could not do anything unless the king granted Nehemiah permission. And so in all of Nehemiah's prayer, Nehemiah never tells God how God must do it. He only asks that God would use him. He submits himself to God and says, "God, if you want to use me, then you've got to grant me success in the eyes of my master, in the eyes of the king. You have got to intervene." Think about our prayers. How many times do we go and tell God what God must do? Nehemiah never told God what he must do. He reminded God of his promises, and he asked God to intervene. We should do likewise. Till next time, goodbye, and may God bless.